yo te de, ay, oh, yo te de, yo te de, ay, oh, yo te de, yo te de, ay, oh, yo te de. Hello, my friends. Welcome for a long-form deep read. Because it is Leo season. Because it is officially Leo season. The sun has entered the western sign of Leo, and so we are here to decolonize what exactly that means and why it is we understand it in the ways that we do thus far, and how we can dig a little deeper beneath that surface and superficial understanding. Yes, Leo. Yes, Leo. And quite honestly, what a beautiful day. Happy birthday to one of the most vibrant and charged and powerful Leos that I have ever known. I love you. Miss you. Think of you often. And just in that, Leo, a very positive projection, a very charged sign in and of itself, in the ways in which we can understand it. And ruled by the sun, but not just in the sun, not by a long shot. And not just the sun as in superficiality or identity, though Western astrology would have us relate that so much to our visage. In truth, yes, fire and a southern node on the medicine wheel, but also air. Much like we blow into embers to create a stronger flame. Much like the wind carries flame and smoke and messages beyond its pivotal point or its southern node of spark or ember or ignition. It is fire, but it is also air. And in that also consider that its translation in indigenous astrology, in Telegi and in Mexica astrology, would be the wolf and also the star. As it expands, because when you start to engage in 13 sign astrology, it is not just a one for one, and you get to see much more of the peripherals of these energies and their characteristics, the bigger picture, if you will, which would also potentially lead us into water energy, an eastern direction, a reaping of what we sow. And so not just the star, but also the moon and the river and the ways in which reflection can be so becoming, the ways in which we see ourselves and that which is around us, and the ways in which we follow that ignition rather than instigation. And so deeply tied with the wolf too, because the wolf howls at the moon and what's in the sky with the moon, but the stars. And to follow the river, to see themselves in the reflection, to nourish themselves, to lead themselves to water. But also not just the star or any star, although that has so much potency to it as well, because the volume of a single proton is containing of many, many suns and many galaxies. And in Mexica astrology, it is an organization of suns. It is an organization of the many suns and perspectives in time. But also not just that. The star in and of itself is also regarded as a second sun, is also regarded as Venus, really. Many indigenous astrologies or ancient modalities of astrology follow Venus or Venus synodic cycles more closely than Western astrology allows us to. Yet again, the patriarchy subordinating a seemingly feminine object, but it contains so much more than that and ought not be pushed into a corner. Don't put baby in a corner, or thrust into a box in that understanding as well. But so consider the star as also the morning star or Venus, and in Mishka astrology associated greatly with the dawn or a deity of the 13 day rulers, I suppose, more so than deities. Tlaquiscalpante Gutli. I tried. Tlaquiscalpante Gutli. That is the representation of this in a sort of embodied energy, in a personified energy, also regarded as Quetzalcoatl, once deceased, once died, and so yet again the 13th sign in Western astrology as Ophiuchus, or the snake. The beginning and the ending and the creator of paradigms often exists in between these spaces and these thresholds, binding and weaving these understandings together. So never settle for just the 12 and come to resolve. Come back home to a new octave. The serpent becoming morning, becoming the morning star in death. And that goes so hand in hand with everything that we have within the stars and coming upon us in this Leo season. Saturn is retrograde now. And so though we may have found some relief in a Mercury retrograde dissipating and allowing for some space and relieving us of some weight, this Saturn retrograde very much takes upon a weight of its own, perhaps heavier, perhaps more endurance ridden, and very much in reassessing or reassembling these organizations of self, kind of like very literally like a new wig like a new wig for this Leo identity, right? Or a new visage, if you will. And not just Saturn retrograde, but within this Leo season, Saturn, the Sun will trine Saturn in early August, and so a threshold of our capacity to observe and thus be able to create with it. It's a very moldable moment, very malleable under pressure kind of moment, and the nodes are shifting as they do, these magnetic polarities and understandings of, which is, exactly that, the death of one and becoming something altogether new, the, death of one idea of time to give birth to a new, the serpent becoming the morning star in the death of itself. And so perhaps the weight that was released within Mercury retrograde is now embraced in Saturn retrograde with a new understanding of responsibility and the palpability of it, so as to allow Leo to fully see itself and hear its call in the wake of the night and in its own ability to follow its truest star. There's a whole lot going on in general. Sun opposing Pluto, which, again, is these mechanisms and modalities. That very much comes up in the last moon reading that I did as well. And so this is very much carrying over and building upon that understanding. Collective understandings in sextile Uranus, or in trines or triangulations with Neptune. The collective understandings versus what exists beneath the still water, and again, what we see or perceive when we gaze into the night, when we guide ourselves by its starry light, and what we're able to follow in the flow of the river or send on signals to the sky, to the sun, from the smoke of the root cause of ember and ignition, the truest point of the flame, and not just the flame itself, and the ways in which it carries, and the space in which it can create or compress. Breathing in smoke, not particularly good. Granted, it rises, which is why they tell you in fires to get lower to the ground. So again, we have this northern sort of node element, this northern direction on the medicine wheel, the capacity for air, the quality of air that is embraced or integrated, that thus feeds the fire or makes the fire a weapon for or against the self in some way, shape, or form. I know I've talked a lot about Venus squaring Mars in the past already, but that is, very much upon us in intensity. And so I think it will benefit us greatly to understand deeper than the surface of fire and its associations with Mars energies, and the ways in which we can redirect toward, again, the morning star or Venus understandings, so as to give it a little bit more light, a little bit more flight, a little bit more breadth and body to the flame in and of itself, and to more fully understand, again, where it comes from, and also where it is flowing to, what messages that it carries. Leos, in their commonplace understanding, very potent energies, very quick to flame, very much so a fanning of their own flames. And so what space can we bring in, replacing these understandings with a little bit more attention toward Venus, and a little bit more breadth to that light? The sun will conjunct Jupiter, which, shifts so many rules, shifts these nodes and these poles, yes, but shifts so many rules in the ways in which we've embraced this weight or this understanding, in the ways in which we will embrace responsibility, in the ways in which we embrace responsibility to the self. And in Leo understanding, yes, very much let your hair down, but also this is much deeper than just a sense of ego, and the ways in which we can embrace the self, and whether or not that is fulfilling, or that is so inflamed, inflammatory, which is much more of a constriction of movement than it is an embrace of fluidity or flow. There's a full moon coming as well, so keep in touch, because there will be a reading for that. But I think it's also pertinent to understand that the new moon following within this season, and the new moon in August, will be in Leo, and also an eclipse in Leo. So these understandings will continue to bloom, will continue to blossom, will continue to be fanning of the flames in one way, shape, or form. And that it depends on what kind of signals he wants to send into the future, what kind of messages you want to, send to yourself or send to the world, or the level of inflammation that you will retain should you not expand your peripheral understandings and expand your horizons in this waking dawn. Mercury will also enter Leo, which, out of retrograde, thank you, but will enter Leo and be able to communicate or pass these messages further along across and in the body. It's very much like stored information storage within the body, and the ways in which we utilize that. And, coming of age, yes, technologically, but like modes and mechanisms. And, on one hand, that's very much, Pluto in Aquarius is very much, technological advancements and what have you. But the ways in which that also reflects how we navigate our internal worlds, how we navigate moving through emotions, or how we let those emotions navigate us for us. Our emotions becoming our identity, our emotions becoming the totality of self, rather than sort of like a means to an end, or you know, a mechanism or a blueprint that is offering more information about the full functionality of the system. And so, again, dig deeper, dig deeper. Mercury entering Leo, also squaring Chiron and Taurus. I think that may challenge some of the, you know, strict persuasions or perceptions of self and the ways in which we've embodied it in the past, and the ways in which we free up space for new understandings or for new ways of embodiment or perceptions of the self. Like what can you still, what have you not given credit to believe that you're capable of moving in such a way? And when we give too much credit to just the fire without understanding where it comes from or where it is going, we become the fire in a very destructive way, rather than you know, again a means to an end, like forest fire versus controlled burns. You know, the ways in which we can even use the ash and ember, the ways in which that starts new flames, and the ways in which the quality of fire can still be retained in what is left behind, or what is left in the dust of it, you know, like phoenix ash. It is still very much a potent quality of that flame. And so it's an entryway into new communications with the self of the self, and I think can allow for a more beautified understanding of self beyond the surface and in reflection. Consider also the understanding of the wolf, and yes, a very loyal-stricken, loyal-ridden sort of creature, but also, you know, the idea of lone wolf exists for a reason. And I think that puts into perspective our ideas of trust. Trust in the self, trust in other. You know, wolves enter in packs because they create this trusting dynamic with others, that, you know, meet the same needs or have the same goals in some way, shape, or form, or are able to hold space even for disagreement, for the necessary growth that comes with family dynamics, and, you know, opposition of opinion or what have you. But also when those things don't meet the same needs, this is also where a wolf may find their own pack. And the stories of, you know, dogs or wolves and evolving, or their choice to embrace humanity for sake of growth and for, you know, sake of building a bridge between understanding and serving each other in, you know, equal parts and equal ways, despite humanity's understanding of, like, quite honestly, abusing the concept of unconditional love. Like, I feel like most people really are dog people because they need to feel unconditional love from something without having to give anything back. And that is where the wolf strays. That is where the wolf, I think, lays down its trust and loyalty to humanity, and becomes the dog, or stays a wild wolf, or becomes the dog by, you know, sacrificing itself, I suppose, to the idea of trust or loyalty for the sake of, or for sake of protection. And, you know, what ways does society very much sacrifice their own integrity or principles so as to be accepted by one thing or another? In what ways does our superficial understanding of Leo sacrifice bonding or bridge building simply to preserve the ego? So it goes both ways, very much so. And so, yet again, we come to this book, Cherokee Astrology by Ravenhill, to gain some insight about the wolf in and of itself. Kanati, direction north, wisdom, creative mind within the traditions of the group. Interesting. Purification, the rigors of cold and storm. Purification, that kind of makes me think of like temperance too, like that flowing back and forth between water and again the winds and turbulence between, or the building of flame from within and so without, and these switching of, you know, polarized nodes or our understandings of, quite honestly, in the superficial understandings we have of polarization or the compartmentalization that we tend to have in traditional Western astrology is like, I am this and that is that, and this is my antithesis and my nemesis, therefore, is actually a rejection of the shadow. And, you know, again, why I love these things, because for sure, yeah, dive into what you identify with most, but then dive into the antithesis or to the opposite. Dive into what you typically least resonate with, because there is something very potent and necessary for sustainability in that frequency and understanding as well. Symbol being the wolf, color sable brown, stone obsidian, like the mirror, like the night sky, like the star. I love how these overlay in such a beautiful way, or the reflection even in the river and the ways in which we follow, and quite honestly the reflection that our emotions can bring us. Oftentimes I think, you know, when we identify too closely to the fire simply for the sake of the fire itself, we forget the spark that started it and that's, you know, thus inspired. And we forget that sometimes the things that simply spark us are also not necessarily the things that fulfill us most. This is why people confuse, you know, a very triggered nervous system as chemistry in relationships, because it is simply them being used to the shadow and not necessarily understanding the true embers of that spark, but simply wanting to touch and hold the flame, not fully grasping its strength or its power or its origin, or how far that can really travel, or how far it can carry you from yourself. Likewise, you know, intense emotions being, you know, so closely identified with that it becomes kind of the all of us. And you know, the intense emotions of like rage or supreme sadness, right? That is not the total of you, nor is it the most fulfilling thing for you. But when we are only interested in grasping the flame, we lose sight of the repercussions of identifying so closely with those emotions, and we lose sight of what those feelings are actually symptomatic of. They're seed to a stimulus and to a response, an engaged response, rather than just meant to be overtaking. Again, the difference between a forest fire and a controlled burn. Element air, flower, bluebonnet, interesting, and herb, the flowering dogwood. Dig into the herbs, dig into the herbs. Symbols in the sky are Sirius, like the dog, a star in the sky, and also a navigation point between this world and the next. At one end of the Milky Way, which we are learning so much more about these days, the path of souls, where it touches the horizon, and Antares on the other end. One or the other is always visible, but never both at the same time. But they can be felt. When the soul enters the way, it crosses over a raging river on a log. Only the brave get across. The weak fall into the torrent below. What a transitional time. Agi Sekwa, the great female Sirius, and Wahya, the alpha male Antares, must both be fed, or they will not allow the soul to pass. See, yes, both must be fed. We may not see both at the same time, but both must be fed. And so, again, when one emotion takes over, it is usually symptomatic of another that has been neglected. And rather than give full, total face and identity to one or the other, we can offer nourishment to both to sustain an equilibrium. Both must be fed, or they will not allow the soul to pass. It is possible to get caught between the two and wander endlessly back and forth across the great river in the sky. Wolf is our brother. He shares our very roots. He goes back to the time before memory. All dogs are domesticated wolves. This was accomplished so very long ago that our legends of companionship and guidance often refer to a tame wolf, the dog. But this wild feral creature, there's also a story, there's an old story about like the wolf and the dog like being afraid of the other. And like, again, what a perfect allegory for these, nodes shifting within us, for these polarities as we understand them superficially, and for the ways in which we dive into the light for fear of the shadow, failing to realize that it only makes it more palpable, more uncontrollable because of that. But this wild feral creature who sings to high heaven when the moon is full in Kanati, the lucky hunter, the real wolf, minion of moon and man along the last stretch of darkness before the resurrection of light, much like we talked about in Mishka astrology too. The serpent becoming morning star in death. The hour of the wolf, a time of birth and of death, that borderline between night and dawn. For wolf is a connecting link between the dark of the other world and the light of everyday existence. A psychic doorway between two worlds. Although a medicine woman or man is more likely to have rattlesnake tooth for a natal day sign, the spirit guide or familiar of that medicine person is popularly a wolf. Long before central heating and electric blankets were invented, the domesticated wolf was called into service as an animated incubator to keep the patients warm. One of the medicinal magic formulas calls on the spirit to cure frostbite because his paw pads are believed to be frost-free. I think now we know that they very much feel through their pads, right? But it is, both very sensitive and also because they have such a keen sense of feeling as well as of hearing, but it's also fairly resilient too. And so I think even, we forget just how capable they still are of feeling because we sort of lose sight of nurturing that because of that resilience. This is, why so many people will be like, if you struggle to step on the asphalt, please put some booties on your dogs because their paws can burn and it can hurt them. Wearing the mask, fur tail, paws, and claws of wolf proclaims the area of expertise of the astrology, or the healer. On the other hand, a dispenser of magic charms and love potions, a conjurer might be calling on Grandmother Spider for assistance. Wolf is a two-way personality, genial to his own kind, but savagely protective against all outsiders. I feel like that's also very caught between like naive optimism and a cynical pessimism. That's like in the same ways that I say like too much confidence can turn into ego, untethered. And too much humility can turn into insecurity, very dense in the self. Same kind of polarity. Lover of freedom and the wide open spaces, a don't fence me in character. This very much carries over into Virgo energy as well, especially within the rabbit or in the year of the rabbit in Mishka astrology. The paradox here is that he marks his own territory aggressively, fencing others out. Careful with that. Careful with that. Careful with the fences that you build and the bridges that you burn. When the dog or the wolf and its original understanding and its role, just as it said before, was in, not just in service to, but was very much a blanket around and a bridge between. And so careful what you fence out and what you compartmentalize. because the fire will burn through it all. Wolf is patriarchal. Believes in the double standard, one set of rules for the behavior of males and quite another for females. Yikes. There is an established pecking order wherein the alpha male wolf is the top dog. This has also been disproven. This is a fairly old book. Copyright 2000. That has been disproven by the very scientists that investigated it, in which case that only exists in captivity. What did I say about be careful of defenses that you build because it will ultimately trap you? The alpha ideation, one is hilarious to me because frequently it's like the most impressionable state of mind. So it makes me laugh when people think that that's the most domineering when in fact it is the most impressionable. But also the alpha complex really only exists in captivity. So again, careful of the fences that you build because it is only a trap for yourself. Those who rebel are ousted and forced to form their own pack or live as lone wolves. That lone wolf concept. Gosh. And I've talked about this in community so much that this need to exile is an outdated hierarchical pattern that does not benefit the whole. Yes, it's something we very much see in groups of animals. It's also been studied within a certain type of gorilla. I want to say orangutan. But it was also not in multiple offenses, but it was a collective understanding, and much like I say, there's no such thing as a good person or a bad person. The choice was consistently made to not have the interests of the whole at heart, in which case the choice is then made to oust yourself rather than to be exiled. And thus we create fertile community ground to create the circumstances in which those characters, those ill-playing characters, oust themselves and exile themselves without exile itself having to be a modality of the community. Only the alpha pair are permitted to have puppies. Yikes. The entire pack cooperates to feed and care for the little ones. See, okay, interesting, because this is also a tenet of like pure matriarchy. This is also the origin point of matriarchal understanding. Is it is not supremacy. It is not that one is better than the other or is now controlling or domineering and subverting the other, but that at the center of the wheel is the protection of life, is the protection of growth, is the protection of children, is the protection of unique and newborn thought, even the protection of creation, in which both entities and energies serve to honor, much like nature in general, balance and harmony and life-giving and growth in multiple contexts. These are very social animals. They hunt together, bring food back to the den, and eat together with the puppies, which they carry about in clamp straws that are lined with needle-sharp teeth. The ancient folklore that tells of a wolf who nursed the twin founders of Rome, Capitoline, the origin of Romulus and Remus, two twins cast off by the gods for being half-breeds. Terrible terminology. But for being half god, half human, cast off of Mount Olympus, cast out of their home, cast out in some way, shape, or form, and sent to die, but found by a mother wolf who then nursed them to health, and thus the story of Romulus and Remus and why the Roman Empire was so powerful, was so strong. And so where we find ourselves sort of shoving under the rug our perceived failures, our wounds, they require nurturing so as to become a strength. This is a key tenet of healing. And, in being a quote-unquote healer isn't to heal anybody else but the self. And thus, by healing the self, becoming an example, becoming a not paragon, but a projection of that this is possible. Thus, others can believe that they are also very capable. This is why we have folk tales and lore to begin with. The ancient folklore that tells of a wolf who nursed the twin founders of Rome has captured the imagination of all ages. The tale is as timeless as the eternal city itself. I wouldn't say eternal. All empires fall, and oh boy, is it falling. And are they shaking in their boots? Not only the parents, but all the members of the pack are nurturers. Yes, exactly. Not hierarchy, but expansive in all directions. Because the hierarchy of empire is doomed to fall. It does not have enough foundation to support the weight of its own rapid expansion, and thus becomes destruction. There is a general atmosphere of friendly playfulness in the pack. They gather on moonlight nights for choral howling that echoes back and forth from mountaintop to mountaintop, like frequencies between nodes, like the space between a breath, like the silence between messaging. That, especially given retrograde after retrograde, feels like there's very little of, but it is perhaps our duty to find that stillness and silence in between. Much like even the Aum is characterized by, yes, its sound and its tenets of, but also its silence and all-encompassing. This is a form of bonding as well as communication with friends and relatives. That Mercury and Leo, with friends and relatives who are temporarily separated, all bay to grandfather moon and howl and bark for the love of the sound of their own voices. Interesting. I would argue for the intensity, that palpability of that frequency united. Like if you've ever been in harmony with another singer or another musician, or if you've ever engaged in like mantra in a collective setting, that feeling is like thickness in the air in such a beautiful, electrifying way. And I think that's much more something to focus on rather than just for the love of the sound of our own voices. This is where the superficial Western Leo gets way too invested into just the mask that they're wearing, gets way too invested into, holding the flame for the sake of the flame, gets way too invested into, perceptibility, like presentation and perceptibility, rather than the quality of, this is, quantity, not quality. This day sign symbolizes activity and movement, as well as passage between physical and spiritual planes, a sanguine patrol of home ground and all surrounding neighborhoods, not to be confused with wanderlust, more like taking care of business on the home front. Here is a trailblazer who guides travelers through the labyrinthine ways of this world and the next, the navigator through uncharted waters, and oh my, what unprecedented times where that is necessary. So get right, and again, like I said, be careful of those fences that you build, because you will not be able to see the horizon beyond them. Who senses exactly where he is going, even if he has never been there before? Trust what you feel, and that will be much more so in the guiding light of Venus as the second sun, more so than the unruly flames and identified sensations of Mars energy for its war for warrior's sake, rather than invested in peace, rather than invested in, again, the light of Venus, rather than the darkness of ignorance, in the weight of the armor of Mars. It is the sign of a courageous and generous personality who is primed for deeds of daring do, like a stick of dynamite with a short fuse. Aye. He will ski with the avalanche, save the damsel in distress, brave the caldera of the volcano, and smoke the dragon out. Interesting. we don't need to be a stick of dynamite with a short fuse, nor do we need to stay the damsel in distress. Interesting. Interesting. Can we acknowledge the intensity of the power of that? Because, like, very literally, the construction of explosives, like, the chemical interactions, like, you don't need much to be able to get a big boom. And a stick of dynamite, sure, as useful as that may be, the short fuse, less so. How much space do we put in between the intensity of our emotions and the integrity of self? Because every emotion is very much a portal. Much like dynamite is used to pierce through mountains and create pathways and tunnels, every emotion is a portal. And I think when we are more apt to understand that, we're more able to use those portals responsibly and understand that, like, yes, I'm infuriated right now, but if I do not use this portal wisely, it will spit me out on the other side of it somewhere that I did not intend to be. Versus understanding that, you know, that is a principality of utilizing these sensations and these emotions so as to spit yourself out on the other side, birthed anew, and, you know, that much more whole and aware, like reincarnation, you know, coming with new and ancient understandings, coming with a new veracity for life, but ancient understandings of self that, you know, often people would say is incarnated in this time, so as to synthesize the understandings of every other lifetime. A generous provider who will share his worldly goods as well as his ideas with the poorest comer. Prodigal of possessions, as if the abundance of the earth were boundless, all this alone to be helpful. Interesting. We need not be helpful just for the sake of being liked. We need to be helpful because we are in right relationship with our intention and its impact, and because we are not just doing for sake of selfishness, but for sake of all things. A wolf personality is one who may be very successful running his own business, who knows how to inspire the loyalty of employees because he is comfortable in that atmosphere. I would argue that we need not inspire loyalty. We need inspire integrity. Those that inspire loyalty are cults, religions, for instance. Your loyalty, your unending loyalty, your unquestionable loyalty to fucking MAGA, to whatever freaking book, to and that exists so outside of just like the religion cults as well, or political cults as well. You know, especially within, you know, spirituality or spiritualism, you know, the ways in which we bow down in loyalty to certain teachers, and, you know, we're icons and pop stars as if they can do no wrong, or the ways in which we covet knowledge rather than honor it, and, you know, somebody finds some esoteric book and starts to revere that as if it is the Bible itself, therefore missing the point entirely. Strangely enough, he is also an excellent member of the team, for he understands the strength of pulling together and the necessity of starting at the bottom and working all the way up. I do like that. I have said time and time again, especially when I was more ingrained in the bar industry, that the best bartenders have been bar backs, and quite honestly, the least efficient and less pleasant to work with bartenders have never bar backed, or have no experience understanding the total sum of its parts. It was a strange hierarchy that I would see, very much so. Starting at the bottom and working all the way up. Realistically, that's like, I mean, even when you're able to like take apart something and put it back together, you know that much more well how the thing functions and how it works. And so, again, starting from the shadow, starting from the roots, starting from the soil, gives you a much more firm foundation from which to grow. Even a tree grows in both directions at all times, and its capacity to reach far and wide at the top of the soil is very much dependent on just how deeply rooted it is in the soil and how healthy that system is. So much like I say with these things too as well. Sure, look at your sun sign. Look at what you identify with most, but also acknowledge the antipode, because there is a wealth of information there. Diplomacy goes hand in hand with a sense of humor in this sign. Subtlety and tact oil the machinery of cooperative endeavor at all levels. And consider the blueprint of the mechanism does not necessarily give you the speed and flow. And so when we identify too fully with the blueprint, we fail to recognize how to calibrate the system. And we simply overclock the stock engine. A court jester may play the fool, but he is forgiven a multitude of sins. He also uses humor so as to direct attention, to offer information that otherwise wouldn't be well received. This is very much like coyote medicine, and coyote is a form of dog or wolf. Wolf is a kaleidoscopic character with unlimited potential, a parent, a teacher, a healer, protector, transformer, pathfinder, opener of the way. Let this not go to your head, dear. Shepherd of the fold. Interesting. Coyote, trickster. What did I say? Jackal, dog's body. Lupine, Lorelei. The hound of heaven and hell. In equal parts. And quite honestly, when people talk about like hellhounds and sightings of them or what have you, I very much think it's a spirit that's bound by its emotion. It's a spirit that's bound by its emotion in such a way that it's brought down from its evolution of upright spineness and awareness into navigating on all fours into, and not for sake of stability, but for lack of integrity. Sharp as obsidian, gentle as a lamb. Again, that obsidian mirror, but also not just used to carve or to pierce, but to see, to observe. According to folklore, it is easy to recognize the devil, because he has no shadow. Interesting. Wolf is, gosh, okay. I will say that I don't buy into ideas of God or the devil, and I do think that, across the board, tribes that are federally recognized have also been so because they, at one point in time or another, be it through false choice and a lie, or be it through force, was through Christianization. And so this is also what I mean when I say, like, read through these things with a fine-tooth comb, because even in indigenous writing, there is still very much this kind of religious dogma. Perhaps the devil does not have a shadow because it has integrated the shadow. Perhaps the devil does not have a shadow because it is both shadow and light. Lucifer being the morning star as well, is where, again, we connect to Venus, and Venus is able to bind these things, to weave these things, to, like it said earlier, to play and nurture both parts. And so there is no need for shadow because there is nothing that the devil is running from, quote unquote devil. When you are not running from yourself, there is no nemesis, there is no enemy, there is no shadow to then heal or treat. There is only awareness. And that is a step beyond duality and deeper into the non-dual and deeper into a full perspective of self. What is that when those pictures, the panoramic photos, maybe even more so, you know, like these fisheye lenses and what have you, without the distortion, is a wider lens angle of the camera. Wolf is sometimes denizen of darkness and therein casts no shadow. He could easily slip into devilish ways without being aware. More often than not, power corrupts. Duh. It is the nature of this sign to set the pattern for others, particularly offspring and dependents. Much like I said earlier, whatever healing quality is in this sign is not because now you have the responsibility to heal the world, or what did it say? A shepherd of the fold, shepherd of the flock. Like, no, that's the ego talking. When you have the gift of healing, it is to heal the self and thus serve as proof that it is possible to others, to inspire that in others. Much like embers of the flame can travel on the wind and start fires elsewhere. It is not that you go around lighting other people's shit. It is the nature of this sign to set the pattern for others, particularly offspring and dependents. He may not allow any freedom of choice, which creates rebellion. Of course. You know, that's the alpha dynamic, is like this perceived ego hierarchy that then really just creates more and more shadow potency. It is also just physics of light and shadow. If you were to take an object and draw it closer to the light, then the shadow grows more dense, more long. See? Look, see? Or if you were to stand under the sun and look down at the ground and notice that your shadow is twice as tall, if not taller than you, and as dense, you can divine even in that shadow. So it is not useless. It is not something to fear. It is something to offer your awareness and your sight to, so as to, much like Peter Pan, to stitch that shadow to your soul in a way that it can no longer haunt you. The sign can be extremely stubborn, of course it can, and considering Mercury will enter Leo and will square Chiron in Taurus, that I think will only be exacerbated and can be afflicted with emotional immaturity. Of course, I have known that of Leos through and through. And that is because we get too caught romanticizing the fire, hoarding the fire, holding the fire rather than honoring it, because we get too caught identifying with the fire in such a way that we lose the space of path of travel, we lose the vibration in between, we lose the path of communication. So let that Mercury, now that it is moving direct, entering Leo, help to facilitate that space. They may be very jealous of territory and of rights. And that's such a, like, my candle is only as bright because I snuffed yours out, or, you know, I can only have so because you have lost. It's a very, like, what's the terminology, like single sum game. You know, when we're only playing for wins or losses, then everybody's a loser kind of thing. And that is something to hold on to. When we're only playing for wins or losses, everybody's a fucking loser. And I think the superficiality of this immature kind of Leo or wolf understanding is very much so obsessed with winning that they fail to see all that they are losing because of it. And that's the fences we build and the bridges we burn, dear. You may become unconsciously addicted to the excitement of replaying the traumatic drama of the past. Yes, when we identify too deeply with the feeling in and of itself without any awareness of the root memory or of its causal impact. Enjoying the emotions of anger, jealousy, and danger. Do you really enjoy them? This is where the spark is not always a spark that lights us or ignites us or inspires us, but a spark that destroys us. Just because they are intense emotions does not mean that that is all that exists. And let us not just enjoy the sake of self-destruction by identifying too closely with that flame, with no understanding of where it's come from and where it's going. Again, southern node to northern node, or the root flame and the air that carries that message across. This is also trauma in the body, and the ways in which that there's now a plethora of modalities, beyond just EMDR, but, internal family systems or what have you, and various forms of meditation that I engage in or that I share, in which case we create that space so as to facilitate a deeper understanding, and sort of an uprooting of that as well, so that we can maintain fertile ground, strong ground, where these desperate attachments to emotion or the stories that they tell, as the total of identity. Throw those rascals out. Yup. Stop jousting with the windmills. Tune in to the here and now. It is a good day to live, says the Ravenhail. It is. It is. It is a powerful time to be alive. And beyond just the biblical understanding, the King James understanding of good and evil, consider that good is living, is life, is dynamic, and that the only evil that exists is that which is ignorance in us, and the patterns that that sows. Even the absolute worst that we can think of, is an instance of cycles of trauma and having hurt, and that the only bad is stagnancy or a lack of choice in any given moment, a lack of choice to make opportune the space in between that cynicism or that naive optimism. Neither are true, but possibility is very potent in between those spaces. And so, my friend, we enter into communication with cards, and we read for Leo, for their time to shine, and thus carry the cycle of harmony to all signs innervated and affected. Leo, my dear, it's your moment to shine. Are you ready to howl? Like the wolf, you are. Or like a lion, howl like a wolf. Similar, if not same. And where do those sounds come from, if not the deepest parts of your soul? More Venus than Mars. That's for sure. Oh yeah, we'll tune into Leo. Take 3 deep breaths with me. All you have to do is take 3 deep breaths with me. We'll tap into this Leo season. We won't have to calibrate for the rest of these readings, but we'll carry this one through. Opening your body to the deepest breath that you can find in your awareness to any sensations that arise. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Take a deep breath in. exhale. Take a deep breath in. And exhale. Interesting. Very erratic. It's very much like rushing to the throne, rushing to a mode of control, rushing to and through what is seen, therefore sacrificing understanding. It's kind of like when kids are real excited about some shit, and you're gonna be like, "Whoa, calm down, We'll get there. We'll get there when we get there." And it's very erratic. It's very impulsive. You can lean into the excitement and allow that to permeate rather than for it to agitate at the surface. Ace of Hearts, top of the deck. Seven of Diamonds, bottom of the deck. Reap what you sow. And again, intention and the impact. If this is the intention, this is the impact. If this is the seed, this is what is sown. And the heart is inverted. The Ace of Hearts is inverted because, again, there's so much more intention and attention and energy on these insecure Mars energies and the posturing that that we convince ourselves that we need for sake of perception rather than for the quality of feeling. And that is where we do not rush growth. That is where growth surprises us. Consider when we rush things, this is when we drown plants. This is when we, find ourselves disappointed for not having such a bountiful yield. But it is because we were only in it for the gain and not for the journey. We're only in it for the, the bragging rights, and not necessarily, the clout, not necessarily the honor of the feeling in and of itself. Like, you can't rush a plant, you can't rush growth, you can't rush yourself either. And we ought not posture or, present ourselves as anything but honest, because it will start to obfuscate or dull the shine from the inside out. It will obfuscate what is truly at stake or the goal here. It's very like Machiavellian, the ends justify the means as long as I get what I want kind of thing. And we can do away with that, because that's not in right relationship. That is selfishness, which begets selfishness, which begets selfishness. And then we wonder why we're in the system that we're in. Because industrialization was never about accessibility. It was only meant to pervert that, really. And so in what ways have you created such a industrialized understanding of self where you see the blueprint of you, and you think that your modes are your mechanisms? You think that that is the total of yourself, when in reality there's a speed and a frequency that is something that has to be felt and understood, kind of like amplitude or wattage. Like every even a light bulb has to have a certain, like the base has to be able to like maintain that charge or maintain that frequency. Or like certain chargers have like certain volts or whatever, certain wattage that is necessary, certain volts that are necessary to be able to sustain that wattage, quote unquote. This is where we, I think, really peel back some layers, where it may get raw and it may get tender, but it is so as to show you what wounds lie under the dressing and what wounds still need tending. In the same way the wolf may lick its paws or lick its wounds, even that can lead to irritation and infection if it is not done well or wisely. Like, there's definitely like an old I guess, old fable, perhaps, that, you know, like a dog licking your wound is actually, like, really good for healing. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I don't think that's true. um, but there is very much something to say about the quality of your own saliva, the ways in which swallowing your saliva helps to have a chemical reaction in the stomach with the acid in your stomach, creates, I believe, nitric oxide, that helps to dilate the blood vessels, calm cardiac stress, and help to mitigate the core body temperature. That is a very important quality of our saliva. So when you get really hot, swallow your saliva. But also the minerals and like capacity for regenerative cells that exists in the saliva. Let us not be so frothing that we forget that that is also a source of life within us, and that must be used well and with great heart. This is again the intention and the impact, rather than just frothing, drooling at the mouth, you know, wanton and impatient about it. And what really does incite those feelings, because the olfactory sense, their sense of smell, sense of taste are very much linked. And so certain scents can very much make us salivate, and those two things working together are always telling a story in the mind, in the brain, in the body. And so consider what it is linked to, consider the story that is told in between those things, and perhaps tell that story more honestly to yourself, and thus more truthfully to everything around you and in your surroundings, so that you can be a true wolf and find that which truly relates to you and fulfills the journey, and not just the ends to the means. Interesting. Interesting. And what is that? Misuse of fire and an understanding of grounding, quite honestly. Especially in a world that's like all hype and exacerbation and like hypoxic states, like that's a misuse of fire and a lack of grounding. Both of those qualities need to be dialed up and dialed in. Let's go backwards. Cancer. Let's go back into you. Multi-tens, 10 of spades, 10 of hearts, 10 of spades, inverted. Interesting. The weight of intensity, the permeability, the ways in which even, I think, feeling can be so embodied, so pervasive that it takes over sense rather than serves sense or stimulus. When we become the weight of all of these things for the sake of weight itself, rather than a firm place to hold them. Gosh, this reminds me so much of meditation today, actually, too. Whereas the Ten of Hearts, when we engage in a full breath and a loving compassion, it's almost like if all of our intensity just like pokes holes within us, right? Like the voodoo that we do unto ourselves, then allowing ourselves to see more fully and in a compassionate place allows the heart the room it needs to be able to plug those holes. Consider, especially within Cancer, that the emotions that we give too much weight to poke holes in our vessel, and thus we sink. But when we offer a full breath and a full awareness to the light of heart, and not light-hearted, but the pervasiveness, the capacity to permeate all things with the full beam of your energy united and in alignment, is then like corks in the boat, therefore no longer sinking, no longer filling, no longer welling up, no longer inflamed, no longer submerged by or drowned by emotion, but able to find its buoyancy and its stability again. This is very much the ways in which the mind takes over the feeling body, in which the stories that the mind tells creates a new sense of reality. And so use that to your advantage. Don't let it take advantage of you. This is very much a clearing of the mind and accessing the truer nature of the directions of your water, of its potentiality, of the weight that it carries, and its ability to permeate all elements of you and all understandings. Let it be a thread, like a piercing threading through, rather than poking holes through your sail. A little patchwork fix it. No big. A little patchwork, fix it. Like a thesis of repair. Gemini. Jack of Clubs, Three of Clubs, inverted. Interesting. Use of fire, but also new information. I feel like the understandings of Gemini and what planets it is serving, it has to be open to new discovery, new information, so as not to get caught in its own ignorance or stubbornness or unwillingness, because that is a misuse of fire. It's kind of like when we're learning a new skill, we have to show some respect to that medium, right? Because like you're learning a new power tool, you gotta show some respect to how sharp that freaking edge is. Show up clear-minded, show up ready to learn, show up ready to engage with just how powerful this thing is. Even in context of other life, that the life around us is far more sentient than we have been led to believe. And when you show up with that level of respect, like speaking to children like they're not fucking idiots, but like they're genuine humans too, yields a lot better results in, you know, relation and an ability to share in information, than to show up as if you know everything, or show up as if you've got it all figured out, or show up as if, you know, that this medium, this modality can't surprise you, that there's, you know, nothing new to see here, nothing new to be learned here. Like, that's all ego. And it's like funny to have to say that when Gemini and its understandings can be, and ought to be, very much the space in between, you know, what is known and what is unknown, and like ultimately what is felt, and the ways in which those things weave together, rather than just, you know, fact versus fiction or what have you, because so much of fiction is really based on fact, you know, or is a beautiful way to dress up very real things, and, you know, vice versa. So much of what we perceive as fact is actually very much a constructed fiction with no real basis. And so when we are able to embrace the space in between and in its nuance, then yes, we come off as, we're able to show ourselves as, you know, so knowledgeable and so wise and what have you. But when we lose that nuance and we lose that space in between, then we very much flatten our dimensions and are no longer able to give or receive in a way that allows those wheels to continue to turn. And what does an air-ridden sign, a mind-ridden sign, need more than that, you know, stimulation of creativity, rather than just of ego and, you know, egoic sense of self, and like having it all together, having it all figured out. And like, honestly, careful if you do, because you're gonna get a surprise, because there's a surprise waiting for you on the other side of that ignorance. It's a fast-moving mechanism as well, especially, both of these are fire. Again, what did I say about, like, a forest fire or a controlled fire? Like, this is fire as a mechanism, as a tool. This is fire as a mechanism, as a tool. This is fire as an ego that burns the self out and hasn't learned its lesson about how hot the stove can be. This isn't, and especially both being flame elements, this isn't like, oh, time for Kundalini rising. That's not the way to do it. Not the way to do it. Increase capacity of breath, increasing, you know, controlled breath, controlled holds as a means of investigation, so as to illuminate the spaces in between breath even more so, but not in induced hypoxic state or forcing of that flow. This is where you don't tame the dragon, but the dragon tames you. Taurus. Taurian nature. Or the eagle and the knight. How bonded are we in this understanding? Oh, interesting. Interesting. Little emo, dear. 6 of hearts, 3 of hearts, both upright. So maybe not emo, maybe very just like relishing in the self. Maybe excited for fall. Look at these colors. How interesting, how fun. Maybe that's also our ability to take in the bigger picture in seeing just how much time has passed and just how far we've come and grown, on what we've come to build, and the stories that we tell ourselves now. It's Six of Hearts, a very balanced heart, a very balanced flow of energy, and perhaps where you are not feeling that is an opportunity to humble yourself to your energy in and of itself. An opportunity to, and humbling isn't a bad thing, but an opportunity to observe and be so mesmerized by just how humbling your energy can be, because it is potent and because it is aligned, because, what a beautiful thing to be humbled by your progress, to be humbled by your growth, in the sense that you can look back and be like, wow, look how far I've come. Look at what I've built. Look at how, close to home I am in my own body and my own understanding, in a way that feels like something that's sustainable, something that's balanced, something that I can lean on, something that supports me in a way that I never thought possible. This is, I think, very literally where the confidence, even in this, broad chest or expression, is also very much connected to the root. This is like very opposite to what just read for Gemini. Is like, we don't have to force the fire up, we don't have to force the root to sprout, but we can recognize that the quality that we hold in our hearts and in our throats is a reflection of what has come before it. And that can be a really beautiful thing. That can also be a very humbling thing, where perhaps we're like, oh damn, this isn't where I thought I'd be, and it's not a problem, and it's nobody's fault. It's just an opportunity to engage with the present moment and choice, now recognizing more so and having seen proof of its impact. And that directs the water's flow with a steady pace, rather than rushing through any door or any gate, and rather than inflammation of the ego. Let it be the best kind of humbling, and in a way that leaves you feeling quite magical and quite potent, and like you have a very full cup, or perhaps a cup at all where you have felt like you have not. And that in and of itself is something to offer. That in and of itself is both an offering and a gain. Is both a, something left at the altar and something received. Very much so. Let your energy in and of itself, let your heart's energy and memory be a most giving and receiving thing. Perhaps that's also just a good reason to spoil yourself a little bit and take care of yourself, and not that Taurus needs any excuses to offer themselves a sweet treat or a bit of a repose kind of day, but what a great opportunity to, and to really revel in it and to really bloom in it. With so much water energy, a blooming is surely just about to peak. Dear Aries, or the crocodile and the wind, the egg of the reptile, and the seed of creation. Okay. Six of Clubs, Queen of Hearts, inverted. Six of Clubs, Queen of Hearts, inverted. A gate, a fence, a boundary, like tension in the air. And also, it's like, what do they say about when you eat too much junk? That, your, like, blood vessels, your arteries must be so clogged. The arteries are clogged with heat, with fire, which too much heat in composition, too much rage, maybe even, that the heart is kind of buried underneath it or calcified underneath it. Too much constriction of the blood vessels, and again, no reason to force the fire to rise, because it does not dilate the blood vessels, enough to receive the oxygen that it needs. This is like frying the nervous system, even. Numbness, perhaps, or intensity. Both are very much understanding of each other on the polarity. This is also, I think, a very pivotal point of tension or relationship with substance use and substance misuse, in the ways in which we use or utilize to numb our deep feeling, or the ways in which we have numbed to a point where we can no longer feel anything. Do you remember what it feels like to love? Do you remember the last time that you have felt such a thing? And quite honestly, maybe even the memory of such a thing is triggering in of itself. Perhaps the thing to investigate is your idea of that feeling, or the intense feeling in and of itself. Because I do think that for all of the negative relationships that we have associated with love or loving or having been loved, generally what I see across the board is we as a society have very little understanding of like the first experience with love, with being loved, unconditionally loved, bestowing of trust, and how often the people closest to us, i.e., family, are the first ones to break that trust, even though maybe first thing that comes to mind is like first heartbreak. That was not the first time that you learned to, trust or distrust. It was just maybe one of the most obvious repetitions of the same pattern. And being able to see beyond just that experience is another door deeper into that story in the self, so as to reinvigorate that, not just that process of feeling, but like the root understanding and the root cause, so that isn't the lasting memory or experience in your understanding, and that isn't the baseline with which you build off. In so many ways, even like the last shittiest relationship we had. This is why, like, we hear so many people say oh, the not standard, what is it, the baseline like of expectation is like on the floor, is like well below the floor. And for sure, that's true in so many ways, but also when we go beneath that, then we learn so much more about our capacity for relation or relationship, even beyond just the romantic realm. And so this is perhaps, in a very beautiful way, the opportunity to see beyond the superficiality of, not just superficial, but like what we think is the title page of this story, when in fact it is the second coming, and when in fact it is the sequel to that story. And we can go deeper into the self and maybe even find something more potent, something more reliable, something more malleable with which to work with, that exists within the memory and the ways in which, not just the body holds that memory, but the ways in which that memory flows and perpetuates and creates new circumstance. This is very, for as much as we've talked about like body and mode and mechanisms of the mind and the way it influences the body, this is very much understanding the speed and trajectory of those stories. And let it not surprise you when towers fall, when we've been building them out of sticks and fucking hay, where we could have been digging a foundation with brick, with solid sturdiness and with a heartfeltness and a steadfastness in honor to the self, in honor to the deepest origin points of feeling, and not just the first time that somebody else betrayed us, but the first time we betrayed ourselves, is also very much like a defining characteristic in the ways in which those patterns start, or the ways in which those patterns can be stopped. But more often than not, we're so willing to point fingers and blame, or not take responsibility for ourselves, or very much just get lost in the sort of victimhood of story that we tell ourselves, that we forget how much power we have. We forget how much power we have and how much potency we have in being able to tell or retell that story to ourselves in a way that is much more becoming, that is much more grounding, and that is much more the kind of not just story but song that we want to harmonize to or sing. That is something to build. That is harmony. Kind of similar to what we talked about with substance use and misuse too, is our own energy in that sense. Utilizing our own callousness in a way to abuse ourselves or misuse our energy toward other people, when we could redirect that cycle towards something greater, something more efficient, and yet again more becoming. Dear Pisces, Ten of Hearts, Ten of Clubs. Neither inverted, both upright. Where did that come up before? But in the opposite order. Pisces is very deep feeling. However, I think they get lost in just how deep that goes and fail to recognize where it can go. Submerged, basking in, sure, but also maybe even suffocated, unable to see the light. This is where stress weighs down the body and we can no longer float. But also the level of sensitivity that all senses are heightened to. If you've ever taken a bath and submerged yourself past your ears, and you can hear your heartbeat, you can hear your blood flow, you can hear even the most faint of sounds. And while that can feel very panicky and overwhelming at first, allowing the breath to guide you, to lead you, to slow you down, will naturally create more space in the body, and that density that causes us to sink will then allow us to float. I think this came up with the illusion of it in a boat. Only we are the boat. We are the vessel. Pisces very much embodies so much of what it feels, or neglects it entirely, or rejects it and neglects it and shoves it under the rug and into the darkness, and is very much like tormented by its shadow in some way, shape, or form. Let us not be tormented by that, but understand the great healing power that submerging the self in water can be when it is done mindfully and carefully and with meaning. This is why ritual baths are so potent to practice to so many and throughout history, because the water in and of itself will follow your directed order of meaning. But when we lose the meaning of the medium, then the water thrashes against all surfaces and will take you under with it. It kind of makes me think of like the lore of mermaids too. Like there's so many stories about how they're just like out to get us, and also so many stories about how they're fearful of us because we cast them out, and that they really just want to be accepted. If that's not covert Pisces emo energy, I don't know what is. Quite honestly, too, in a very literal way, it's like, it's spiritual bath time. Light 10 candles, surround yourself in them, bask in the light, allow, the water in and of itself to absorb that light, and to allow each ray of light from each candle to penetrate through you and to warm the water therein without you feeling like you're boiling yourself alive in your own emotions, like a lobster, I don't know what they're called, I don't eat seafood. But those lobster broils, that's what it is, I think. Those lobster broils where, they throw them in live, and I think, we let our emotions do that to us quite a bit. Especially when we avoid them, it just kind of like ups the heat. But we can allow that to be more of like a spa, more of like a sauna, rather than boiling ourselves alive. And legit, in a very literal way. If you needed an excuse for a spiritual bath, then this is it. Then this is very much it. Get yourself a nice hot bath running. Get yourself candles all around you. I say 10 because there's 10 flames here. And allow yourself to ritualize you stepping into your emotions, not out of fear, and not out of some like capitalistic necessity, but so as to allow yourself to release density, to find a full breath, and to find your float in it. Allow the water to calibrate with you. Allow the water to absorb every other element and to calibrate with you. And it nourishes the earth in your skin, in your body, in your organs, and helps the flame to travel and pass, and allows the water to calibrate and integrate, and carries the message into the steam, steaming of the windows, of the mirrors, of, the detoxifying effects of that steam rising up into you. All elements are present. All elements are present, and so there is no need to rely on one more than the other, or to fear one more than the other. Take that and run with it, Pisces. Carry it far into the ether and across all dimensions, like you ought to. Aquarius, my misunderstood darling. With Pluto in retrograde, all up in ya. Or at least last I looked. Four of clubs, 10 of diamonds. Four of clubs, 10 of diamonds. Breaking of boundaries and also setting of new boundaries. And not by barriers, like we talked about in our reading of Leo, not just by building fences or barriers, but by understanding of palpability, of malleability, of the quality of the frequencies in between. Qualities of hydrogen bonds, even though there isn't particularly water here, it is very much fueled by the relationship, or a byproduct of this relationship with an internal fire, and the ways in which we see it represented or reflected in the earth. 10 of diamonds, like kind of like speckles in the sky, like starlight in your eyes, like glittering, like shimmering, like reflection. It's like current, like not just in water ether, not just flow of water, but like current, like electricity, and the ways in which we can direct that. Four of clubs, four of clubs, four of clubs. It's like the corners of each, the corners of the self, the corners of every angle of self, the corners of each, the corners of the room that you're in, the ways in which you fill that room. Do you see yourself reflected in that room? It honestly amazes me how much some people don't let their personality show through on the walls that they let hold them in. And in so many ways, in technology, very much, Aquarius written for sure. I think so much of society fails to recognize how much the technology that we develop is really a reflection of our needs and value, or our wants and values, maybe even more so than our needs, and that is very much its own method of teaching and learning, but also, very much like the art on your walls, the art on your flesh, the art on your skin, the art that you see in the mirror, and the ways in which you engage with it or have been able to hold space for it. And in general, I think Aquarius goes so misunderstood. And Pluto retrograde, yes, Pluto also very much misunderstood. Not even really accepted by its peers in so many ways. Then I think this is also sort of rehashing of that program so as to see more of ourself reflected in that. Quite honestly, that also makes me think of like just how much of technology is upgrading so as to keep better track of its individual parts. So as the system sees itself reflected in every mirror, kind of thing. So there's two truths to that, or there's many sides to it, any truth. But there's definitely multiple sides to that truth, and I think This is also where we ground into the frequency and get to see sparks fly from ourselves, or where we find ourselves, so grounded into the frequency outside of us that it's like electrocution, like a toddler putting their fingers into the freaking outlets, rather than be, ignited or sparked in a positive way. It's more so in a like burnout kind of way. So it goes very much both ways, and at the same time. So consider that understanding when it's like, okay, what are you tapping into? Um, and do you expose yourself enough to things that do reflect you? I feel like there's so many, for all of the modes and mechanisms that we've talked about, just within the self or in our capacity for emotions or, understandings of community that we've talked about, finding not just like-minded people, because I feel like that's a very small pool. We'll never really find somebody that's as like-minded as us, as I think we hope to believe, because everybody is unique and different. But there are very much, similar threads and similar veins and similar stories. And so finding more of that and being open to more of that, while also being open to the fact that, you may share a lot of the same things, but also think very differently. Are you able to hold that kind of energy? Or is that too much for you? Is that what, burns you out? And that's honestly why so much of community fails, because we're really just looking for other fucking clones of ourselves that isn't free thinking, that isn't, uh, expansive energy, that's just more of the same. Everybody loves a like-minded individual until they disagree, and then it's, suddenly disposable. And that's something that we have to reconcile. That's something that very much exists within us, occurs within us, but that's also very much something that is, I think, very, very reflected in the world around us, and why things and people and places are so divisive, and so quick to shut down, rather than to allow for the time or space to even seek or entertain the possibility of resolve. Which is funny too, because I totally relate. Like people will be like, "Oh, well, this person is the same sign as me," or da 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 da, as if that's like mind. When in actuality, I find a lot more dissonance in those kinds of understandings, because obviously I perceive things very differently. I've been kind of generally told that all my life, that I offer a different perspective, and that I tend to make people see things in a different way. And there are people that absolutely will embrace that. And it's not necessarily people that are like minded, but it is people that are willing to explore and be creative. And that is very like mind for me. But people that assume like minded is just in agreement, for sure, don't like that I do that, and it rubs them the wrong way, and it challenges their fragile sensibilities and sense of self, and therefore it is not a congruent or helpful relationship, and is not allowed to be, malleable or alive or dynamic, and is really sort of pigeonholed into this, compartmentalized or corner space. Nobody puts baby in a corner, kind of thing. Don't be, and that goes for you too. Nobody puts baby in a corner. Even you. Even you. Because even in this, there are 4 corners, and even in this, there are 40 corners. 10 times as many, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. 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 Although technically 48, I suppose. Because of the two outside diamonds. Because of the 2 outside diamonds. Interesting. Interesting. Which even in that is magnified by yet another power of 10. So it is fractal expansion or fractal implosion. And perhaps that is also very literally in a technological way, the ways in which we, overclock a system, or overheat a system, or, like quantum computing. It's, computing in so many, exponential possibilities, faster, deeper, smarter, wiser, yada, yada, yada. But we lack the infrastructure to be able to maintain that kind of usage. The same thing can exist within us. We may find, superficial similar, but do we lack the infrastructure for a level of expansion that either party craves or thrives in? That is dynamic. Whereas too much of same, like mind is, quite honestly, quite static. Capricorn, the earth of the fire of earth, the earth of fire. Party. I love that, actually, because, yeah, Capricorn don't only party on a Friday, they set the tone on a Monday. How perfect. Set the tone, dear. Don't match the frequency, set the tone. Interesting. Okay. A lot of mind energy. 8 of spades upright, 10 of spades inverted. The weight of mind, the weight of expectation, the weight of perception, the weight of tangibility, even. It's like value, not because it's valuable to us, but valuable because we know it will be perceived as value, is a rule that holds us back. It is kind of like a vicious mind cycle. It's like supply and demand. It's like not real. It just kind of perpetuates the same old bullshit. That is perhaps a cycle that we are breaking free of, or bringing more attention to, so that we can engage with the process of breaking free of, because it weighs a lot. It weighs a lot to be perceiving yourself from the outside in. It weighs a lot to, because that's not embodiment, that's very much anxiety. It weighs a lot to control perception of. It weighs a lot to constantly be sort of navigating and constructing perception of through the eyes of others, rather than through what actually feels and what actually resonates. That is where you'll find lightness. Quite honestly, like, it sounds kind of rude to be like, clear your mind of expectation and anticipation, of what you think you should be, and instead engage creatively with what you could be and what it is you really feel you want to be, regardless of how it's perceived, regardless of who likes you, doesn't like you for it, because again, it'll open you to maybe not like the superficial like minds that are like, oh, we like the same color and we're actually the same sign, but people that are more invested in creativity and whimsy and self-embodiment and self-reliance in a much more deep and ingrained way. But also patterns. Sometimes I think it's hard to see outside of that because we're so used to what we've seen already. And so, break a pattern. Break a pattern of assumption by surprising even yourself. This is like that movie, what is it? Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like how they like jump through timelines is by doing something like completely absurd given the moment or the circumstance, right? And so I think perhaps we've bogged ourselves down with too many rules, dear Capricorn, um, and sort of turned ourselves to stone rather than to grounding. And now is a time where we can remind ourselves that nothing is really written in stone. And there is no pattern or habit that you can't break if you really want to. And there's, and you know, if you really allow yourself to be open and available to resources and possibility and to entertain and to create, um, and allow yourself to be more like clay and mold rather than to assume that it is all written in stone, because that weighs you down. That weighs you down, that pinches you down, that does not let you breathe, that does not let you move, that will not let you float. But it's all in the mind. But it's all in the mind. It's all swords. It's all in the mind. It's in the nervous system. It's the stories in the nervous system. It's also the echoes, you know, like in our bones, the stories that we've hollered into caves for so long that it's all that we can hear repeating in the back of our minds. But we can clear that space. Quite honestly, like, for sure, I don't think meditation itself is like, clear your mind, stop your mind. I don't think that's the way to go about it. But I do think when we engage in like mantra japa, when we engage in like, and this isn't just like affirmation, this is very much like a devotional practice. And that has been the stillest my mind has ever been. In the middle of 108 repetitions of a mantra that I took the time to learn and to engage with and to be curious about in the ways in which it circulates through my body. Like, legit, there's like perpetually a point like halfway through where it's like my mind is so clear that I'm like, whoa, what am I doing? Where am I? Like, what's going on? And then I kind of like remember that I am in a body and that this is a place and a time, and then I'm, you know, like I kind of like there's like a almost like a hurdle that is just so naturally jumped in the persistence and the devotion of persisting through that. Not just persistence for like grit your teeth and bear it sense, but the devotional aspect of like, I'm going to move through a full cycle of this in harmony with myself so as to find a lighter version at the other end of this tunnel of awareness. Quite honestly, it doesn't even have to be anything super decorative or what have you. To simply recite an Aum 108 times is more of a practice of a devotion to the self, of devotion to the moment, of devotion to something bigger than our current understandings, is wildly freeing. And there are many a study to show that it can be quite mitigating of the mind fire and of circumstances in the mind that have sort of taken hold. I write about this and cite some studies as well in sources and citations in my Qualities of Power and Powers of Quality research document. So if you have not engaged, then perhaps that is just another reason why it is waiting there for you on my website as a resource to help guide you back to a more balanced version of yourself that is freely and mindfully malleable and not just beholden to the stone that you've been sort of locked in. Sagittarius. Dear Archer. And so much more, really. Hello, hello. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me. We are going through all signs affected this Leo season with Leo as our pertinent understanding. We have gotten through much of it. Please do yourself a favor. Stick around, but also go back to the beginning. And we start with Leo because it is its season and it is its spark of the flame. And we see what other ends of all signs that spark and that flame touches and ignites. We're at Sagittarius. We've still got a few to go. And obviously this will be saved and posted so that you can always come back to it. Because the astrology that we go through in the beginning too will be, throughout this Leo season, but I think very much in preparation for August's new moon and the eclipse that will also be upon us in Leo. Howling at the wolf, asking for trust, not just loyalty. Okay. 3 of Spades, inverted. Right. What also a beautiful thing? 7 of Clubs, inverted. Interesting because of what I just said too. Like trust in the self. I love the 3 of Spades because upright, it is such an integral thing. Like, it's not a like who hurt you. It's more of a like what makes you thrive. What do you bleed for? What fulfills you? What do you care so deeply about that you would fight for? Not sacrifice anything, but like fight for, that you would fight to believe in. Inverted, I think, is very much, very literally like a stake in the ground, right? But also the ways in which I think we've come to find ourselves, not just like stake in the ground, but like also kind of like waving a white flag, like throwing arms down as if to give up, or as if we don't know what we're fighting for anymore. And 100%, like that is trust in the self. Like, do you trust yourself? Do you trust what has gotten you this far? Do you trust your own integrity, your own alignment? Or have you been contorted and tweaked and turned and molded by and shaped by society and upbringing, and in such a way that you're at a place where you're maybe kind of blank slate in it, and you're like, I don't know what fuels me anymore. I don't know what sparks me. I don't know what fulfills me. I just know that I have rage, and that is sure a spark, but that is not a spark that glows or that builds or that charges. That is a spark that destroys. And so maybe we're finding ourselves at the other end of that, right? However, this is also a very conductive thing. It can be 100%. A sword or a spade is, an iron or a flint or a tool that, yes, very much sparks, but is also, when entered into the ground, like those gardens with the copper things, because it does have a conductive current and flow that feeds the soil beneath it. And so for the weight that we have carried us thus, that has carried us thus far, that we have carried thus far, what does that tell you about it? It's almost like even like okay, we lay the sword down, we empty the bag. What does the everyday carry tell you about yourself? And are there tools with multiple uses in that carry? Are there tools with multiple uses, or have you lost use for the tools that you have carried thus far? In which case, there's no. What a beautiful thing! You don't need to carry that shit anymore. You can set it down and exchange it for something new entirely, because the Seven of Clubs is a threshold that is an obstacle to overcome more so than a blockage throughout. You know, there is a way around it. There's always a way around it. Like da 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 da. We're walking on the path, right? We lay the sword down. We dump out the everyday carry. Realize we don't need this. We don't need this. We see there's an obstacle in front of us. We ought not give up hope, because you know, like when we're driving and there's those fucking huge trains that take forever and ever and ever to pass, and you know, people will literally just like shut off their cars because they're going to be stuck there forever on like those cargo freight trains. That's what I'm thinking of. There are people who are impatient and will get, you know, they're like the first ones out of there, and they are rushing to wherever for whatever reason. But there are absolutely times where people are like, let's see if there's another way around. You know, if this part of the river or the road is blocked, then let's see if we go up or we go down, if there's another way through. And realistically, the people that rush will pick either as if they are equal. But those that are patient enough to put together possibility will go against the grain, will go where the train has already been so as to find an opening. That is where we are. What is in front of you right now is not an obstacle. What is in front of you right now is not, you know, a hurdle so as to suck all of your motivation out of you, but it is an opportunity to see another way around or through. Like crossing any river, like crossing any path, there are multiple ways. Should you open your eyes and your ears and your heart to be creative enough with what you have, and it may not be with what you carried thus far, it may be new tools altogether. And that is something that is going to need you to trust yourself to be creative. You know, trust yourself to leave behind with that which no longer matters, that's no longer helpful, that's really just a weight in your pockets, and trust yourself to fill your pockets with what is necessary to move forward. It's kind of like, oh, I've got all these fucking pennies in my pocket, and I know I'm not going to need them, but I do have this like string and a thimble and a dollar, and that seems like it might be useful. Let me keep those in my pockets. And sure enough, you find you gotta pay the troll $1. You gotta tie a string to a branch to make a bridge. You gotta, what was the other thing that I said? A thimble. You float across it. You float across the river in a thimble, or you know, allow it to protect you in some way, shape, or form. But it's, you know, consider it kind of like in very much like video game kind of terms, and maybe that's, let that not just be the novelty that typical Western Sagittarius requires, or you know, is so inundated by, but let that be the opportunity to create with your character, and to create more of your character in a way that is feeding possibility, potentiality, and growth, and not just, you know, novelty and starry-eyedness for shiny objects. Even the crows, they're not just attracted to shiny objects. There's like a perception of value there as well. And they'll remember you for that perception of value too. Channel that spirit and see where it can take you. Even when it feels, unexpected or altogether new, it's the perfect opportunity to trust yourself and see what you can feed the moment with. Because it is a frequency that will grow. Clear the mind of doubt so that you can greater discern with your innermost feeling and understanding. Because, we've all been somewhere with somebody that's just like, that's never going to work, that's never going to work, that's never going to work. And they're no fun to build a fort with. So don't be that guy. Be the homie that's like, I don't know, why not? Let's see. Why don't we try it? Have faith in the process. Have faith in the process. What does it already say? Trust the process. Trust the process. That's very much the vibe. That's very much the vibe. Scorpio. A serpent, yet again. Alright. We got 2 3s, 3 clubs inverted, 3 of hearts upright. So we have a 6, and perhaps the 9 is the mastery of both of these handfuls of awareness and understanding, of invocation and evocation, of offering and of receptivity, all in the same carry, all in the same balance, right? And this is kind of, I know Jester came up in the reading. This is kind of that like tightrope walker, Jester feat. And that is the 9, that is the stability, that is the mastery. 3 of clubs. Clear sky, like spinning poi. In which case, it's less about the act and it's more about the trails that like leaves behind. In which case, even the things that we let go of and that we feel like we're sacrificing perhaps for, and that, perhaps for forlorn about missing, is still leaving a great trail behind. The beauty that we see in the sky isn't even like happening at exactly that moment. We're seeing it, the trail of that experience from, light years beyond and light years, prior to. And so never underestimate the impression that you leave and the impression that your passion leaves, the impression of your potency. And that goes for great things. That goes for never underestimate just how powerful your word is, just how powerful your laugh is, just how much joy your presence can bring. But also never underestimate, like I said, with emotions being portals, never underestimate how even the most impulsive, careless moment can also leave an impression. So, don't lose sight of yourself as if it doesn't matter anymore, as if it never mattered because it was just this one thing. No, it is always a ripple. It is always a ripple. And if it is something that allows you to see more clearly, then it is a great ripple. If it is something that blinds you, like sometimes we're driven to a frustration or an anger or a betrayal that is clarifying. And it's like, damn, like they say, believe people when they show you who they are the first time. And it's like, damn, thank you for showing me who you are. I'm not gonna invest any more of my time in this. Wow, what a fucking blessing. But also, sometimes we are driven to such a state that we are blinded by that intensity. We are blinded by that emotion. We're blinded by, the idea that we have around a person or around a thing, and so we fail to see it clearly. This is very much an opportunity for you to be able to receive that wisdom while also letting go of the attachment to the thing or person or place or what have you, while still retaining that information, while still retaining that lesson, that learning, that integrity. Because, the mind holds on to, the sensory involvement with all of these things without us physically having to hold that experience or that person or thing or what have you in a tangible or literal context. This is very much us learning how to use that fire, use that knowledge, use that impression and that spark as a guiding light. As a guiding light. Rather than, again, too close to the flame, hot to the touch, scorch the fingers. Three of Hearts, interesting in the other hand too, because you would think that it would be the other way around, right? Like if flame in the left hand as a receptive but also offering guiding light, and heart in the right hand as in our willing offering to self, to act through clarity in feeling too, because of that. So both of these things are feeding each other. But it's also, kind of like we talked about in multiple other readings, may not look like what you initially thought it would, may not look like what you have been conditioned to believe it would, because typically I think we would assume that the heart goes in the left hand and the wand goes in the right hand, or the fire goes in the right hand. And it's very literally and deliberately opposite here, because I think there's so much more that can be done when we are in alignment or aware of the potency of our emotions. If we utilize the inner fire as something clarifying, then the ways in which we act through that emotion will always be impactful and offering of impression in some way, shape, or form. And so when we're not mindful of these things, that's like when hurt people and they don't realize it, right? Or when we don't realize our own strength and we break something. Or when we don't realize, the power of our words and we hurt somebody's feelings. Or, we don't realize the carelessness with our words when we could have said something more accurately, more clarifying, what have you. And conversely, when we are very aware and in tune with these things, and we communicate in alignment, we communicate efficiently, we communicate from the heart, we communicate from deep feeling, and not just from perceived sensation or identified emotion, or identifying with emotion. Yes, identify the emotions, but not just identifying with the emotion. This is where I think people struggle with things like apologies, because they're still so identified with their own hurt ego, or their own sense of hurt in the thing, where they make it about themselves, even in the apology. And this is why I always say, it is not an apology if it comes with a redirective I statement or a sort of a redirective but statement, like, I'm sorry, but I was just doing what I was feeling. I'm sorry, but you can't blame me for wanting da 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 da. Or, I'm sorry, I just didn't think that it would matter that much. I'm sorry, but I da da da, because the 100% the apology is nixed. It doesn't matter anymore because you're focusing the not even like you and integrity, but you and fragile ego. And maybe not you. Maybe you've been at the butt of this and have heard far too often half-assed apologies that weren't real apologies because that ending fucking statement cancels out the initial apology. And likewise, if that has been you, well, now you know. You can be more mindful with your words when you do offer that kind of emotional and verbal embrace to somebody that you have hurt without intention. And this is where the intention and the impact also become very important. The fire is the intention. The heart is the impact, the impression left behind on the spirit, on the heart very literally, but also in the memory of the blood, the memory of the water, and the memory that runs throughout the body, therefore. And so, I think it goes both ways, like really intensely, and for a lot of people, because I think a lot of superficial understandings of Scorpio are very much shock and awe, and so they'll be real bright and fiery, and then be like, well, I didn't know it would hurt you so bad. I'm just being honest, blah, 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 because they're looking for shock and awe, and sort of the novelty of shock factor, really. And conversely, people that are very superficially attached to just emotions, just emotion for the sake of identity, overridden by their water, really, without understanding its flow, will say things that they'll regret and will repeat that cycle. And thus the apology is, again, nixed because you're repeating the same pattern. And so it is like too little, too late, too much or not enough. But also in knowing this, it can be a perfect cycle of 3, 6, and 9 in perfect alignment, balance, in magnitude of frequency. I like that one a lot. Of course I did. Of course I do. The O ficus in me and the O ficus in you. Okay, dear Libra. Okay. Steady progress, dear. Steady progress. This is also maybe a mitigation of like expectation of circumstances too. Like, let's not get ahead of ourselves, kind of thing. 7 of Diamonds, 8 of Hearts. I feel like, very close to the mark, but also the ways in which, like, maybe not any, like, nothing is just good enough, because our expectations or our wants or our desires is always, or what we call a desire, is always going to be more than what we have. more than what we see. And this has come up in other readings too, but like there's so much access to information out there now that if you're not seeing what you want to perceive, then dig a little. Dig into you and allow that to open up doors and windows and eyes of perception in the world around you. But also, I think, you know, in a very literal capitalistic sense, coming from the Earth of Diamond, um, and kind of again, like I brought up, like supply and demand. If the demand always exceeds the supply, then yes, there is perpetual unfulfillment. However, the Seven of Diamonds can also instead be gratitude, and instead can be, you know, marveling with gratitude at the possibilities. Like, for sure, there's a horrible amount of information about terrible things that are going on in the world, but there's also availability of like, oh wow, this is great progress, this is a great program, these are brilliant people engaging in the kind of things that, and you know, creating movements and mechanisms and modes of thought to move with, that are more aligned with that which I want to see. Do not trust your algorithm to lead you to those things. You have to dig. You have to dig, and you also have to dig within you and be more of that which you want to see in the world. And that is, it is not as hard as it sounds. Again, close in proximity, very close in thought. Just kind of missing, I guess, missing the mark in anticipation. Like, you cannot anticipate rhythm or always miss it. You have to be present in the moment. You have to feel deeply. And when we have these two things connected in alignment, then this Eight of Hearts can feel very deeply about the gratitude of this Seven of Diamonds, or, you know, be able to see it as a resource, be able to expand it as a resource, be able to offer it as the plenty. And this is the funny thing too, is I think when I think there's a lot of truth to when people say that it's people that don't have as much that are willing to give so much more. And the people that have, you know, more wealth are often more stingy, more reserved, more real fucking tied up the ass, honestly. But those that, you know, are living paycheck to paycheck, or are struggling in their own right, or more willing to invite you for dinner, to send you home with leftovers, to, you know, offer you whatever that they have, you know, the shirt on their back. And that's kind of where I think we ought to be, like in the grand scheme of Libra and the ideas of justice, absolutely, where what we have is regenerative and thus will be enough because it will come back tenfold, rather than the fear of lack and of hoarding and of not enough or too much that loosens our grip, our balance, and our stability on any of these things, either way you throw it. It is not easy, but as simple as presence and awareness that allows your scope of vision to expand and be able to take in the whole picture, rather than, you know, the directed anticipation that tends to narrow in on, you know, all that is missing, all that is lacking, all that is needed and necessary, that can be more debilitating and paralyzing than it is motivating. And so allow yourself to find some presence, awareness, to dilate that moment, to dilate that vision, that sight, so that you can perceive more of that which is around you without these blinders of all that is too much or not enough. It condenses in the body. It constricts the body. But you can find some openness and some fluidity and space for room to breathe. room to breathe with a grounded and present awareness. All the better for that emotion to flow. Virgo. Virgo. Surprise, surprise. Okay. Nine of diamonds, three of diamonds. Interesting. There's a bridge between what we have perceived and what we are willing to perceive now. Because tangible reality is really just a mode of perception. It is not that tangible after all. Again, like blinders, you know. The material world is an illusion. It is a mirage. And so this nine, when we understand how to navigate the internal world, the external world, is malleable by the same rules and structurings. We cannot force our way through, just like, you know, we cannot force our way to pass through a wall, right? But, you know, much like ghosts, when you are aware of your energy, then you can utilize that energy or transfer that energy into anything. Like, it's very literally a transfer of energy from a physical plane to a physical plane, or from, you know, a physical understanding of reality to another, you know, sense of that. It's a transference of energy. It's you being able to pass through dimensions, pass through walls, pass through senses of self, in physical, in real time, but also in understanding that it is because of what is inside of you. It is because of the ways in which you feel. And if you force it, it condenses and it does not let you move. But if you feel it and you breathe through it, then that pressure does not meet a wall. It passes through and it passes against you. Or, you know, it passes through and it passes with you, rather than meets against you. Three of diamonds is, quite honestly, I think in so many ways, like, very much how we lead with our breath, how we guide with our breath. Like, this is piercing through surfaces, or contact through surfaces. And yes, physicality, but also with the intention behind it. For as much as this is like diamonds and literal, it's also like so metaphysical. It's transference, it's teleportation. I wouldn't be surprised if we got some new insights about teleportation technology soon. It is also, I think, what fuels, you know, Reiki, what fuels understanding of chi, or ki, or mana in the body in a very literal way. And it is something that in many, if not all modalities, is something that is also gathered from the earth and transferred through the physical portal or vehicle of the body and of the breath. And so, you know, yes, very physical, very literal, and also very metaphysical. And therefore, it is felt before it is seen. It is believed even before it is seen. And this kind of takes us back to like do you trust yourself? Or in that space, do you doubt yourself? And then that becomes that friction where the energy does not pass through between barriers. It does not permeate the cell. It knocks against instead. It meets up against, and this is friction instead of passing or transference of energy. Like, like you will hold hands with somebody and you like touch something that's like electrocuting, then it'll pass through you. That is transference of energy. That is the physical contact that allows that energy to, that serves as a conduit to that energy. Recognize that you are a conduit for your inner reality to your external reality. And that is more than just two, that is the alignment of your internal reality, your external reality, and your trusting of the two. That is your internal reality, your external reality, and the quality of breath that guides you in between those two spaces. This space in between is the threshold. This is the mode of belief that you bring forth with you as you pass that threshold, as you pass into any given timeline, as you pass from one emotion to the next, as you pass from one truth into from the mind into an embodied truth. This is where creation comes alive, and you trust the process. And you trust the process because you know that you've come into alignment in some way, shape, or form, done the work in some way, shape, or form to facilitate that process rather than to expect or to anticipate. This is why so many scientific studies about, metaphysics or psychicism in so many ways, shapes, and forms ultimately always just conclude that like more research is needed because the anticipation and perception or doubt that observers have, I think, very much plays a crucial part into it. And so, how do we facilitate such a mode of trust within the self that the feeling of observers wishing us to fail is no longer an obstacle? It makes me think of like performance too, because you're very much like on, this is the audience, this is the stage, this is the relationship between the audience perceiving and the performer sort of feeding off that energy as well. And that goes in so many ways because yes, the audience wants to be excited and wants to see you be super hot and bombastic and blah 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 blah. But also, I've very much been in performance situations or audience situations where I can feel their wanting, like their disgust, they're wanting for failure, they're wanting for, the pain and the extremes and yeah, to see something terrible and gross rather than beautiful. And that is very much a palpable frequency as well. Do you let that control the intention and what brought you to offer this level of heart in anything that you do? No, you facilitate such a deep loving and understanding of whatever medium it is and what it means to you, that even those doubts cannot permeate that surface. But you're able to transmute that energy, which is again that transference of that energy and allowing it to become something else and entirely new altogether. And that's exactly where we are. Exactly where we are in time. So move steadily with that. Bridge those gaps. Even just in the way these diamonds align, like allow that to be a passing of energy back and forth, a passing of breath back and forth with whatever it is and whoever it is you're interacting with. That is connection. That is community. That is intimacy. That is the romance that everybody seeks, and it is in life and living, not in the distractions of our time. Wow, wow, wow. That is a cycle of harmonies through the 12 understandings of the Western signs. Unified in space as the 13th, as we pull one more. Harsh. What are you going to tell me that I don't know? Of course. Of course. Of course. Of course. Four of Swords at the bottom of the deck is alchemized, transmuted through all of the elements, and very much a conduit for experience. This is how we feed the body, feed the earth, feed the experience, much like I just said. The Four of Wands is the threshold, and the threshold of creativity. Not a doorway like we've seen before, but a doorway of our own creation, a doorway of our own imagination, and where we get to see and peer into even the darkest corners of our mind so as to shed some new light of perception. We follow the path, we follow the dreams, we follow the radiation in between even the most solid things. If you blur your eyes, you get a better sense of the shapes as you're drawing them. If you follow the feeling, again, the morning star, a navigating light, guided by Venus, not by Mars. We do not follow feeling for sake of fragile ego or because it is perpetuating of identity. We root through sensation, and we follow the integrity and imagination of a given sensation and the stories that we want to weave. This is where we are dream weavers of our past and into our future, using the present moment, dilating the present moment as a transference of those experiences. This is the threshold. Do you trust yourself? Will you allow it to carry you through? Not in a way that you even have to lunge or leap, but in a way that is so radiating that it cannot help but carry you forward. Beautiful things, my friend. And truly valuable and conductive offerings. May we lead with, may we feed with, and may we be ever so nourished because of it. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. These are our guys. Big woo. Gosh, gosh, gosh. Gosh, thank you so much to the people that have hung out. Thank you so much for being here with me, for offering this level of presence and awareness. May all of these understandings feed you in harmony and resonance and resolve timelessly. May that be a cycle of momentum that lifts you up and that grounds you both ways and in all directions, and not that spins you into oblivion or into a madness. In fractal expansion, not in internal implosion. By the 13 moons, my love. Beloved, I will see you next time.